Hey everyone, welcome to the show. And today I have my good friend John Odibo. So, John, welcome to the show.
Hey Dylan, thanks for having me, man. This is exciting.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't get to do too many other podcasts.
yeah. I mean, I think you had me on your podcast a little while back, and since it's grown from then, right?
It's grown. I've been able to reach out to more and more guests, which is exciting. I have random guests reaching out to me, which is kind of fun too, because they're like, "Hey, I really like your posts. I'd love to talk about this or that," right? And the goal at first was just to educate people, but
Yeah,
at the same time, it's an opportunity to enhance other people's careers and put their spotlight out there too.
yeah. I mean, like, I remember you from high school, so that's how we met back in high
Yeah.
school, and you were the kid with the flashy shoes when we played soccer, right? So the skinny kid with the flashy shoes. You're a few years younger than me, and so I remember you from that, and then it's been cool just like reconnecting, and then seeing you out playing soccer, and then also seeing you get into the entrepreneurial space and kind of building your own platform. So what was the inspiration behind getting into finance? Was that something that you were always into, or was that something that like you had an event and then something happened and you're like, man, I need to learn this?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned like the skinny kid with the flashy shoes, right? Like that's probably how many people might describe me too. I've traded in the soccer cleats for loafers now. I've always kind of been like flashy. In high school, I was a little quieter. I feel like it came into my own in college and became kind of like loud and borderline obnoxious. And so when I fell in love with personal finance when I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I feel like that is a super basic story right there for people to say, yeah, that changed my life. But it really did open my eyes, and I just got super passionate about personal finance, investing, not working for other people. Because although I'm comfortable working like a 9 to 5, the aspirations of building my own company, building an empire, right? All that is there. So
Mhm.
I kind of see the job as a means to an end, and all the money I get from that job, I'm trying to funnel into other means. But Rich Dad Poor Dad is really what opened my eyes. The Millionaire Next Door is another one that really changed my financial viewpoint on the world from like a consumer to a little bit of both consumer and producer, because I like my nice stuff, right? I definitely
Yeah.
want to keep buying stuff, but I just try to limit or have that balance of both. And then that is kind of where I fell in love with the idea of sharing that vision with others.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Okay. So you kind of went on a personal journey, were inspired by a book, and then like you started looking into that kind of stuff for yourself. And then you're like, well, wait, I can also like learn this stuff, but then it's valuable for other people to know it as well. Um, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I was reading a book called recently. It's called How to Get Rich. It's by the
Okay.
the founder of Maxim magazine, and
Oh, sweet.
yeah, it's cool. I'm only a few chapters in, and it definitely has a very bold title. But one of
100%.
the things he mentions, right, is kind of distilling lessons and things he's learned. One of the things he mentions is like, you're not really ever going to get rich from a corporate job, right? Like you can make a good amount of money, but you'll never be truly wealthy
Yeah.
if that's your goal, right? Making someone else money. And he's like, so the people that go that route, they got to be careful because they don't want to become so entrapped in that system to where they don't get out. But he's
Yeah.
like, smart ones, if they go in there, they're going in there like to learn, to make the connections, to see how the business, to see how everything operates, so they can extract all that valuable information and start applying it to their own ventures in the future.
Exactly. I appreciate that a lot because I think I'm kind of trying to do the same thing, right? Building things from scratch is tough. I think you can attest to that probably harder than myself here, because you've got multiple different businesses going on. You're writing the books, and you're on the back end having to promote and market all that. So building something from scratch is tough, and also a lot of the time you're going to get the question of why you, right? Like, what are your credentials? What's your background? Why would I listen to you? Well, if you can start to say like this was my expertise, or I did this and that for this consulting company, then that builds the back end trust with you and your expertise there. And then you can kind of lead to wherever you want to go with once you have that trust.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. Especially like in our world today, like people are so trained to look for that little certificate of authority, like what company you work for, what school did you go to, right? They want to see that box checked when you're talking to them about something. At least that's what it seems like to me. Do you find that to be true in the world of finance and financial advice, or not
Yeah.
financial advice, financial education?
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. You nailed it. The idea that this is not financial advice, right? That is something that we have to preach all the time. But here's the thing, most people don't really listen to the financial advice they get anyway. If it was that simple, they'd go on Google, they'd spend less than they make, they'd invest the difference, and they'd retire on time. Or
Yeah.
they'd listen to Dave Ramsey and just do it, right? But the benefit of kind of being like us and having experience and being able to talk through the mistakes that we've made and the success that we've had, but telling it through a little bit of a different lens and having the personality to go with it versus just being a financial advisor, I think that's what really draws people in and makes them want to listen. It's also super dangerous because I see some stupid stuff on social media, and it's like you got to proceed with caution, right? Like there's so many ways to get scammed out there that I want people to look up and fact check everything I say, because I might not be right. And sometimes I'm not using exact numbers, right? I'll say 20K instead of 19 and a half. But the idea is to get your mind working, to get you motivated and start thinking for yourself, which is,
Yeah.
again, just something that people don't really do when it comes to finances. And I'd argue these days in the modern world.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. One of the things you said that was that is so important is financial literacy. And it's something that most people don't have because we're just told, "Hey, do this, do this," and we're just like following the program rather than actually critically thinking about it. So why do you think
Yeah.
that is? Why do you think that people are so financially illiterate?
Man, I think it's tough. I think that's the first thing, right? Like we're in a world where people are told not to really talk about money with their peers, or that it's kind of like a taboo topic. Well, the
Yep.
first thing that we are able to, one of the best ways that we're able to learn is through socialization and talking with others. And so if we don't understand it, then maybe we check with other people like, hey, I thought I could only spend, $5,000 on this, but I'm actually seeing 5,500. Is that your experience? Right. And then you start talking with people and then you learn that way. That's one. Second of all, I'm a big advocate for having more financial education in school, but I also only believe that that will go to certain lengths, because how much did we learn in school that just went in one ear and out the other? So you have to make it engaging content and you have to relate it to the real world. Like this is why you need to have your money in order, because you're going to want to buy that fancy car, or you're going to want to have a kid and you got to pay for that kid, those types of things. So I just think that people aren't engaged. It's not very specific. Most of the time it's very generic advice, so it's hard to really like listen and feel like you're getting value from it. And
Yeah.
then also people are just kind of scared to actually confront something like their finances if they're making mistakes.
Yeah. And I guess one thing is do you think it has to be, right? Like, do you think finance and financial literacy has to be complicated, or do you think it's being made that way for a reason? Because a lot of people like to say, it's in, their best interest, or it's their interest, whoever they are, right? Big brother
Yeah.
or whatnot, the government, to keep people financially illiterate so that they don't notice the things that are going on around them. Do you see any of that, or do you see more it's just like people are being lazy and they're not putting things into practice?
I think finance, money in general, is kind of a little bit of a gated community type situation where people use big words, especially the professionals, to make it seem like it's something that only they can do that you cannot, right? Your average person, your average listener there. And so I think when you get situations where it's kind of dumbed down, you break down a Roth IRA, right? You break down pre-tax versus post-tax, and you just stop using terms like pre-tax, post-tax, and you start explaining it to someone who's like, the money you get after taxes are taken out of your income, right? Your gross income, for example. I think it becomes a lot easier for people to digest. And I think there's a lot of industries like that where, medicine is another one where, we'll use big words to make people who don't necessarily have that background or that education feel like they need the expert in the space. And I do think there's a room and a space for the expert, but not probably in the most general sense of just throwing out these big terms and expecting people to get it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, what do you think about, like, do you think the direction that we're headed to more specialization in the area, or in the realm of finance, do you think that is a good thing or a bad thing? Or do you think it's something that's going to change, where there are apps and information out there, podcasters like yourself, that provide information for the common person so
Yeah,
that you don't have to be a specialist to get ahead? Um, where do you see that dynamic evolving in the future?
that's a really good question. Thinking about like the future and what finance will look like in 10 years. It's probably something I should have thought about more, but I think it's really hard to be a specialist in more than a couple fields. And I say a couple generously. Really, it's hard to be a specialist in like more than one or two. But if you think about when you get a house done, right, you have a general contractor. That general contractor then hires other subcontractors.
Mhm.
And so when you think about financial advice, I feel like it can kind of go and trend in that direction where one person can give you enough information, or you as a human can have enough high level information to get by.
Mhm.
But then once you want to start digging into crypto, for example, well, then that's when we got to start looking at your program. If we want to look into real estate, then that's maybe where you go to Bigger Pockets, or any of those real estate investors who focus just on that because they do it all day, every day. And so I think there's a lot of benefit to having a specialty and having a niche, and then potentially working with someone, or but I think the general person has to have the foundation down first before
Yeah.
they can start going crazy and investing into crypto or investing into real estate. Those are kind of risky assets, right? And you
Mhm.
have to kind of know what you're talking about. But if you don't have an emergency fund, then you could be screwed down the line when you start to go trying to get rich really quickly.
Yeah. So where would someone like where's a good place for someone to start? I mean, I know you said you started with Rich Dad Poor Dad. That kind of was like your inspiration. I've heard a lot of people that they start there.
Yeah.
Um, like what would be like the top three things that you need to know for your foundation? Or could you just still like, you need to have this for your foundation when it comes to, building your knowledge awareness and building your knowledge and financial awareness.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I loved Rich Dad Poor Dad because I love the tone of Robert Kiyosaki. That's
Okay.
like one thing that really stood out to me. That tone is not for everybody. If you watch him speak, he kind of comes off like a dickhead sometimes, and then
Yeah.
also he's always making bold predictions about the economy. He's been saying hold cash for like 20 years now. He's been saying the stock market's going to crash, and while we kind of are in a little bit of a crash right now, and definitely dealing with recession style signals, maybe we are in a recession. Who knows? We'll just change the definition of that though. Um, I think you have to have the basics, right? And Robert Kiyosaki talked about that a little bit, but then reading other books like The Millionaire Next Door, and then also there's so many different authors. You have to find the tone that sticks with you. But
Mhm.
when I talk about the basics, I kind of use the tough love approach for finance, and that's if you're spending more than you make, you're never going to get anywhere, right? That's the first thing. Budgeting is like the first step to me because you have to know what comes in and what comes out of your wallet every single month down to the month, right? And then at the year end, you should probably look at it at a year end too, because some subscriptions, for example, you pay monthly, but then other times you're paying for things on an annual basis. So they're going to show up differently on the bottom line. So having that fundamental awareness and visibility into what they're spending and what they're not, that's like the number one thing that most people won't even do because they're ashamed maybe of their spending habits.
Mhm.
If you love going to Victoria's Secret, be my guest. Go run it up.
You
Go
caught
to
me.
Victoria's Secret. But then maybe but then maybe you have to cut back on the Whole Foods,
Yeah.
right? Maybe you go to the regular local grocery store instead of Whole Foods.
Uh,
That awareness to me is like the first thing that anybody can do to make the right step there.
okay.
Um, Second of all, I would say have goals and work backwards from those goals. So some people don't even know what they want in life,
Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's pretty intimidating to think about what time I want to retire. Do I want kids? Start. Just take a guess, right? Like who do you idolize that's like 30, 40 years ahead of you or 10 years ahead of you? And how do you get there?
Mhm.
And that also comes with transparency, a little bit of being able to talk about money and your goals, because then you have to feel comfortable potentially asking people, hey, you live a really nice life here. Are you making $1 million or are you making $100,000?
Yeah.
Like there's a huge gap, and both of those people probably can afford boats,
Yeah. Is
for
it good with
example.
cash or is it
But it,
financed?
exactly, exactly. So I think the ability to talk about money and then set your goals and then vocalize those goals is probably the second thing. That's something that I'm super passionate about, and that's why I made Talk Cash or Don't Speak to talk about money more and to kind of leave your emotions, your feelings out of it,
Mhm.
which is really hard to do when it comes to money.
Of course.
And the third thing I would just say education. Like anything, right? You've written books, you have a program, you have a show, and yet you're still reading a book called How to Get Rich. Why?
Yeah.
Right? Because you want to advance your education on that.
Of
So,
course.
like anything, you have to find out more. You have to be a constant learner, and money is not different because I think there are people over the last couple of years that we'll stick with the crypto example. Over the last couple of years, I've been saying cryptocurrency is a scam.
Mhm.
Well, it's been around for longer than we think. It's just been kind of mainstream for the last like 4 years or so.
Yeah.
So if you're ignorant, then you don't know what you're talking about. And you're potentially passing that ignorance on to others too. And if you have kids, you will most definitely pass that ignorance on to the kids. So
Yeah.
why would you want your kids to be worse than you, right? Like you can only share what you know. So I think education and being a constant learner is like that third thing. And that's super cliche, but it is important.
Yeah. I mean, I think I agree with those fundamentals. So you said one, budgeting. Two was look forward into your future and see.
Goals and transparency for two.
Yep. And so like work backwards from those goals, right? And then three is just continuous education.
Yeah, yeah. I think if people are able to do those things, then slowly but surely it's 1% better every single day. It's brick by brick that you build a house, and those things give you a foundation to then go on and decide: do I want to get rich? Do I just want to live a comfortable life? And those types of situations there.
Yeah, I mean, and speaking of building a house, like I know you didn't build a house, but you recently purchased a house, right?
I did. Yeah, it's exciting. It's like the second house that I purchased in my life, but the first one was with a partner
Mhm.
purely for business purposes in Florida, very different market. And so yeah, I'm super hyped. It's a new project to take on. It's a new fun headache to deal with too.
Yeah, everyone likes to make it seem like you buy real estate and then all of a sudden you live this glamorous life, but it's not like that. Like you said, I mean, it kind of taps into that continuous education component. Is you can't just like there's nothing that really exists that just exists pristine for forever. You have to maintain things. You have to monitor it. You have to watch it. You have to make sure that it's either getting if it's alive, that's getting fed, that it's getting changed, and all that kind of stuff. It's getting exercise or sunlight. If it's a plant,
Yeah,
but if it's an asset, you got to make sure that it's compliant. You got to make sure that's not falling apart, that something doesn't break, that it's functioning properly. Um,
absolutely. And what I will say is, when you buy a house, there will be things that are broken or fall apart within the first 2 weeks.
yeah,
I would say the second week in this house, it's an older home.
yeah,
It was made in like 1950, but certain parts of it are newly renovated. But the newly renovated houses to me aren't a good investment because someone has already made the money when they sell it to you,
yeah,
right? Like we can put some sweat equity into this, but first of all, the dishwasher, when I open it, the top falls out pretty much versus like
uh,
coming out. If you pull it out, it will roll out automatically. You push
yeah.
it in to load the bottom of the dishwasher, the top rolls out still.
Gotcha.
So that's like a headache right away, right there. Second headache is that when I run the dishwasher, I found a leak in coming from the dishwasher, and this is like 1 or 2 weeks in, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, here we go, right?
Oh
So
no.
uh, there's always going to be things that go wrong in a house because I mean, I that's just the nature of houses,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah. So you gotta like expect that, right? Especially so if you're going out and looking to buy a place, right? You have to plan that like you can't blow all your money and then you don't have any money for repairs, and then you're living in some dilapidated shanty that you thought was going to be an awesome fixer upper, but it turns out that it's not because you can't even afford to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, there are new builds. People move into new builds that have things wrong with them because the builders are trying to cut corners when they can. And that's not to really slight builders, but that's just the nature of business. You're always going to maybe overlook something or just know that, like, that's not really that big of a problem.
Yeah,
So I would say, yeah, if you're going to buy a house, like, again, goes back to the basics, that emergency fund is super crucial when you go to buy a house. You can't deplete your emergency fund to buy the house because then you have $0. Something's going to go wrong in the first month, and you're going to have no money, or you're going to be using a credit card to pay for that. So I would say having that nest egg or that emergency fund is super important. Um, Anytime you take on a big project like a house or a car or a boat, right? Like these all require maintenance, and you have to have the money on the back end to take care of that maintenance.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, don't ever forget to factor in the maintenance. That's a good lesson as well, right? Things will break. But for your house, like I'm curious because I know I've heard just through the grapevines about just the interest rates on mortgages going from like 3% to not over 5% in the past year. So, and even though the houses might, and there's all the news and headlines about housing prices that keep going down, but then if you look at the like effective payments, they're
Yeah.
still significantly up. So, how did you navigate that environment?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm like a big well. As soon as interest rates started going up, that's actually when I started my house hunt right there. Interestingly enough, because over the last I've been in Denver for 4 years now. When I first moved out here, I was looking at houses, and they were all really expensive,
Yeah.
and so that's why when I did the flip down in Florida for probably about a quarter of the price of what houses are here now, 4 years later, especially. But I was keeping an eye on the market and it just seemed high. Then when I actually had like the resources and I was ready to make a purchase, people were bidding over. People were wiping out contingencies on the mortgage, and when they go under contract, they were wiping their or not wiping, but ruling out their inspections and such. So people were making a lot. It was a huge seller's market,
Yeah.
and I only look at real estate as a investment. I want to buy my forever home, big fat mansion,
Yeah.
right? Like the ones you see on TV, like the Grant Cardones, all that.
By a lake
But
or by the ocean, which what?
exactly whatever that is to you. You know what I mean when I say your dream home.
Yeah.
But I'm 29. I can eat shit for another 5, 6 years easily. And so my goal is to just buy houses that are going to either cash flow or they're going to appreciate well, or that you're putting sweat equity into it, and do that 3, 4 times or something over the next 10 years. And then 40 years old or so, that's when I can buy my forever home. You got to make some sacrifices first. So as interest rates started going up, the market calmed down a little bit. The demand settled, and that's where people are like, oh, the housing market's crashing. Perfect, good, I'm going to start buying now. So I started the house hunt, and houses were still high, but people were dropping everywhere, and houses were sitting on the market for 11 days on average when I started looking, which my realtor told me like that's quick, but it used to be like 3 days,
Yeah.
just like a year.
Yeah.
Right. Imagine listing a house on a Friday and by Monday you have an offer. That's crazy right there. And these people are bidding against each other. I heard of people putting in bids against their own bid. So like, hey, we offer 200, but we also offer 250 if we need to go up to that high. You're bidding against yourself at that point. So that's crazy. I was never going to get involved in that market. I
Yeah.
would have bought somewhere else before I did that. So interest rates rising actually put a slow demand around the houses, because someone who could afford a $600,000 house, because that interest rate is higher, like you said, your buying power goes down, and now maybe you can only afford a $400,000 house. We live in Colorado. You're kind of limited in what you can get in the place that people are probably looking for their
Mhm.
forever home. So I also moved 25 minutes outside of Denver. I love living in the city, but I live in Englewood now. 25 minutes out, it's the suburbs, a very quiet street. If you come to try to rob me, I'll know, I'll see you, I'll hear you coming. But
Yeah, do you have Ring set up yet?
so
Do you have your smart door up?
uh, that was like the first thing I did. I got it. I went down the rabbit hole on home security, and I'm obsessed with that stuff now. But that's also because I'm like paranoid. Before I lived in an apartment,
Yeah.
4 or 5 different places people have to fob in. Now it's just like a front door.
Yeah.
But I locked in a sexy rate of 6.125%. It was very, very high there compared to what people have been doing under 4 just in December or so.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
my goal is to eventually refinance down to a lower rate again.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully that those times come. And but I guess you have to do the trade-offs. You do the balancing act of like total price of house versus payments, right? And the interest rate you get, right? So you have to kind of look at both of those because th- right, they work together. Right? They're both, because like you could have a house that is more expensive but a lower rate, so your payment might be the same as a house that's less expensive in
Yeah.
terms of like house value, but with a higher rate, so your payment is actually the exact same, right?
Absolutely. And then in a competitive market too, if people are bidding over, if a house is worth 600,000 and people are bidding 625, then that's $25,000 that you're kind of losing, because unless it appraises for 625,
Yeah.
the mortgage lender won't cover that. So you're having to pay that difference, which is also crazy.
Yeah.
But you're then hoping that the housing market keeps going up at the crazy rates that it's been going up. And right now we're seeing a slow in the market. So people who bought with the expectation that it would skyrocket in value and it didn't, now they're sitting on their hands looking really silly. But I guess that's again like my opinion of real estate coming out. Like I just see it as an asset. If it doesn't make sense on paper, I'm not interested. Whereas I doubt people do even some napkin math to kind of see. They just look at what they can afford.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a mentor. Maybe you can comment on this. On he would always say is like, you make your money when you buy the house, right? Not necessarily when you sell it, right? Of course, when you sell it, it locks in the
Absolutely.
deal. But when you buy the house, it's like really when you make your money, right? Because
Yeah,
you buy it the wrong place, wrong time, wrong price, like you'll never make money on something. And
that's the thing. Yeah,
and
you want to find a good deal. You don't want to be underwater right away. And that's why again, like interest rates going up brought the prices down. And yes, the my mortgage payment is still as high, but I'm hoping my mortgage payment will go down again if I can refinance. And I'm hoping that I bought at like, not at the peak of the market. It came down a little bit. I think the market's gone down a little bit since I bought, but I'm okay because I'm going to sit in this house for a little bit. But I'm hoping that I bought like at a good time, not at the highest peak. Only time will tell, though.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I am curious. So with houses, a lot of people are doing Airbnb stuff, right? Is that something that you factored into your decision?
Yeah, I did not want to buy a single family home. I think that's another mistake right there. So people often say, this is like a common saying, that like a personal home or buying a house is the best investment that many people make. And I would argue it's probably one of the only investments they've ever
Yeah.
made, other than maybe their 401k, maybe putting some money in the stock market. Most people really aren't buying alternative assets. Most people aren't really going out and investing heavily every single year. So other than maybe like stashing away 5% in their 401k, yeah, their house is their only other asset. So of course it's what they have to rely on. But yeah, I wanted to buy a multifamily home.
Okay.
It's Colorado. It's expensive, so I wasn't going to be able to find the triplex or quadplex most likely. So
Yeah.
I was looking at duplexes. I ended up with a home that has like an additional, they call it an accessory dwelling unit. So
Okay.
it's like a mom and pop's home or a grandparent's home or a carriage home. A lot
Okay.
of different terms for it, or a guest house you could call it too.
Yeah.
And it's completely separated from the main house, which I would argue is almost even better for my plans with it, which is Airbnb. And it gives people their own space versus feeling like they're on top of someone or directly below someone, or you're sharing a wall with anybody as well. So yeah.
Okay.
So I was able to get 2 units for what I would argue is maybe the price of one.
Yeah, and then that can also bring down, the effective cost of your house because you have basically someone else paying off some of
Yeah.
that mortgage. Now, do you think, and this is something I don't know, but do you think that because of the existence of platforms like Airbnb or what VRBO or whatever they are, that the market has priced that into the price of houses that can um, implement those strategies to where like those places are selling for more? Because like back when those things first came out, there probably was a slight arbitrage opportunity to buy a place that was perfect for that type of strategy, and then use the network effects of those platforms to bring people in and cover your costs. But do you think the market has started to price that in more?
No, that's a really good question. I think that kind of goes down to how savvy, and I wouldn't even say it comes down to the savvy seller. I think it comes down to the savvy real estate agent.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of talk about real estate agents kind of being obsolete in future years. There is still a lot of value to having specific expertise around the housing market. You
Hmm.
may be able to Google some stuff about a house, but having a realtor tell you how to list, how to price your based on strategy like that, and then how to market it, saying like, oh, this is a great investment property, investor special. Those are the types of sayings that you'll see. I think that goes a long way. So I definitely think they're a little bit more expensive, but it depends on who you're selling to too. If
Hmm.
someone just wants to sell to a young adult who has parents who live with them, for example, like they're the care provider for their parents who are a little more elderly, then that person is not going to see the value of paying more for that as much as someone who's like, yeah, that's going to pay my mortgage right there. So I think you just have to be careful. There's also a lot of restrictions coming into place with each state and each city now. So in Denver and then also Englewood, you cannot have an Airbnb unless it is your primary residence. So I couldn't move out and totally Airbnb the entire place. So those are also things you have to kind of factor in. And I think they've taken those steps to stop the housing market just blowing up
Hmm.
through investors buying just for that reason.
Yeah, because I know up here in near Vale, there's some restrictions on where you can do Airbnbs, and then people always get in an uproar when someone buys from out of town, buys their
Yeah.
secondary home, and then
Mm-hmm.
they immediately try to rent it out, but they bought it at the peak, all-time highs in the market, and so now the mortgage that they have to get covered is so high, but for the people that are locals that are trying to get housing to actually operate, and keep the valley running, keep the industry running, it's so much more expensive. They can't even afford to live there. And it's
Yeah.
creating you know, this big problem. It's like you got people that you need to make the town, like the town of Vale run,
Yeah.
but then they can't afford to live there. And
Yeah.
they can't afford to live there, they don't work the jobs. And so jobs to keep the people, they have to raise the prices. So it becomes even more and more expensive.
Yeah, it's a huge back and forth. I mean, anytime you live somewhere where people want to move to or come and visit, like LA, Denver, New York, you're always going to have those options. Then you talk about Vail, you talk about the Breckenridges. You guys are in an entirely different market because that is a place that thrives off tourism.
Hmm.
And like you mentioned, they're the locals. If you're like a lifty or if you work at the ski resort, you're not making like $1 million. You're not and then you're not someone who can really afford one of those multi-million dollar houses most likely, but you still have to live around town to get to work every day. You still have to be able to afford groceries and everything. So I'm on the investor side, right? But I definitely have sympathy, and I kind of try to figure out like what's the best scenario,
Of course.
right? Like what how can you, and I think we also live in a world where rent is crazy right now.
Oh
So
yeah.
people are bidding on apartments for rent. And I think if you make an apartment a reasonable price, if next to you is 2,000 a month, next to you is 2,000 a month, and you guys are like, we want to make this affordable for locals, we're going to go 1,600 a month. Well, you have more options of tenants, more people are going to apply. And it's an interesting strategy because then you can kind of pick and choose who you think is going to come in, be a reliable tenant, and take care of the place and really value and appreciate the difference that they're paying versus their neighbors who might just be more expensive, but like they can afford it, but they're going to treat the place like shit.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess one final question on housing and stuff. So there's a lot of chatter about the real estate market collapsing. There's people in one camp that say no, it won't collapse just because of the cost of supplies to build houses. We have a housing shortage,
Mm-hmm.
um, and things like that. It's just a momentary kind of relaxation in prices. But then there's and especially with inflation running at all time highs, real estate has historically been one of the best places to put your money or park your money
Yeah.
um, to protect against inflation. And then there's other people on the other side that are like putting all these indicators saying, we're in this massive bubble that it is going to collapse. So what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? Is it going to keep going or is it going to collapse?
Oh, so I'm not an economist. And one, anybody who's listening, I can
No.
preface by saying the bias of I just bought a house.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have bought the house if I thought the market was going to totally crash.
Yeah.
But here's what I will say. If the market totally crashes, in 2 years, I will buy another house
Yeah.
because I didn't just buy a single family home. And this is why my opinion kind of differs from people who buy a single family home and they have to defend their position. They need the market to go up or else they're going to be underwater and they're never going to be able to sell and move to a bigger house when they have more kids, anything, right? Everybody has their motivations. But my thinking is that this Airbnb should at least cover a portion of my mortgage. Some great months it might cover all of it. So anything that I save from paying that mortgage and paying rent, I'm going to stash away and put myself in a position to hopefully be able to buy again.
Yeah.
Um, but do I think here's my thing, right? There's Go ask all your friends. Everybody kind of wants to try to buy a house for the most part,
Mhm.
most likely. If they're, one or two unique cases where they're like, no, I don't want to buy, I'm fine renting forever. That's fair too. But I bet the listener, and I bet you, Dylan, if you go and ask most of your friends, they'd probably like to buy a house
Oh yeah.
now or a year ago. And so that's the demand that we're competing with here. So the supply, even though the interest rates are going up and it's hard to buy a home, I think there's always going to be a whole generation of millennials who want to buy a home, and then the generation below us soon enough is going to be well, they're in the working world now, and more of them are going to enter the working world. You need a place to live, and that's why I think real estate is always a good investment because if you don't want to live in it, you can rent it out. People will always need to pay for rent or a home in
No,
what case there. So I don't think the demand is going anywhere. Populations are getting bigger and bigger. And then supply, I kind of agree with the fact that now that there's more houses out there, that's great. But that's just making like that's opening home ownership up for another level of people. But whereas before it might have been saved for like the top 10%, like you have to be willing to do this, that, and whatever and pay whatever to get a house. But now there's a whole another level of people, maybe the next level down in income wise, that can try to buy a house.
yeah.
Soon enough, maybe it will become the next level down too, all the way down to the point who someone who earns $52,000 a year on their own, which is the median salary in America, can go and try to buy a house on their own too in maybe a high cost of living city. So
Yeah.
I just don't think I don't think the demand is going to go anywhere. So that's why I'm still
Yeah.
bullish on the real estate market.
Yeah, and from the crypto side of things, we're always saying that they're going to keep printing more money. So if you still have demand, they keep printing money. You probably see that the values go up. So it means what we were talking about earlier. You just got to make more money. So that
Unfortunately, with inflation, that's the answer. You
yeah,
literally need more and more money every single year to live, right?
yeah.
Like we're not even joking there.
So which is, it's a problem, and for problems you got to come up with solutions. And so that's, I think, why more and more people are doing things like building podcasts and doing side ventures, and looking to learn and become financially literate so that they can create more streams of income, or make their current stream of income grow faster and go further.
Yeah. I
Um,
think a side hustle is almost required in high cost of living cities these days, right? And we're not even in one of the most expensive cities in the country. We're maybe in like the top 15, but I mean, and Vail I'm sure is expensive too, but it's not like a Seattle. It's not a San Francisco,
yeah,
which is another point here, real quick, just to kind of tie a bow on real estate. If you're in a high cost of living area where you are like, I can't buy a house for less than $1 million, and you don't, and I just said it's stupid to buy a single family home, if you don't want to buy a single family home, maybe look at like Cleveland, maybe look at St. Louis, look at somewhere where like a smaller city around you where you could maybe buy a duplex or a triplex. And if you can move there, great. But you don't even have to move there. You can pay a property management company to take 8 to 10% of your total rent brought in. Which, if you look at the numbers right, hopefully you should still cash flow on top of that. And then you can rent it out in that local market. And then you potentially are getting enough that cuts into your rent, that the difference that you're saving, you can go do it again. So it's kind of like a snowball effect with building wealth through the asset of real estate.
yeah, by doing some like market arbitrage. Like,
Exactly.
make your Seattle salary working for that tech company, but then buy
Yeah.
an asset in another city and try to get a larger return versus spending more for a lower return.
Yeah, I think buy where it makes sense. You don't have to
Yeah.
buy where you live. You can buy where it makes sense. And with the world we live in now, I think that's another trend of people getting. I mean, I get a San Francisco salary and I live in Denver, and people are like, "Why don't you move out to San Francisco?" Because my rent's $1,000 cheaper than yours, and then we get paid the same. Why would I? And I get paid. I get charged less on taxes too. Why
Yeah,
would I do that?
exactly. Yeah, no, you're doing that market arbitrage really well.
I
Well,
wish I was doing it in like Milwaukee or
yeah,
something,
but
and I
then you're
have to live in
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to, like, slum it completely.
Yeah. Yeah, you can still live in a great place that's maybe a little cheaper. I mean, that's I think why Californians are fleeing to Austin, Boise,
Yep.
Las Vegas, Phoenix, all cool places. They have their own unique thing going on. And if you like the outdoors, like that's what put Boise on the map to me because their real estate market has apparently been going crazy.
Yeah,
But
it's
like you
skyrocketed.
can still get outdoors, but you don't have the costs of California. You don't have some people are escaping for the politics too. So, a
Yep.
lot of people are fleeing for different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell me about. I want to know more about your podcast. So, when did you start it, and what made you finally decide to do it, and then kind of tell me more about, like, how it's been and what type of challenges and stuff that you've come across along the way.
Yeah, yeah. So I just crossed the 2 year threshold earlier on this summer of the Talk Cash or Don't Speak podcast. And so I'm pretty happy about that. It started very inconsistently where I would just kind of do one when I had some time. And then now I'm on that weekly schedule. Every now and then I'll take a week off. But the idea came to me during when I think everybody and their mother went and bought a Blue Yeti microphone
Yep.
and started making a podcast.
Yeah.
But I actually like I think I
Is
paid
that
like
what you have?
like $200.
You have a Yeti?
I got the Blue Yeti. Yeah, is that what you're using too?
No, I got a Rode pod mic. Yeah, so it's,
Okay, is that nicer?
they're different. They're
Okay,
different. Yeah, like I nerded out and went down the rabbit hole for studio stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, they're just different. It depends on what you need and what your setup is and what works. And I mean,
yeah.
everything's better
Well,
than
quality
anything
makes a
online.
huge difference. I mean, you can see it in your camera and the background and everything. All that makes a huge difference. When I started, I was recording my podcast off of my work headset, and it didn't sound great. But I basically just downloaded Audacity and I you put my plugged my work headset in, and I just started talking, just started rambling. And I made the very first episode was on like the basics and intro to investing because that's something I knew I could ramble about for like an hour.
Yeah.
And the idea kind of came to me. It was my birthday, so it was April in the pandemic, so like 2019, I
Mhm.
think. Yeah, that would put us at 2 years. No,
2020.
2020 actually. And and I was FaceTiming some friends because obviously we're all quarantined and we're all on different parts of the country, so we're FaceTiming, and I just went on like a mini tangent rant of like, yeah, because people are stupid with their money and they're doing this and that and that. And one of my friends is like, "You're hilarious, man. Like, you should really make a podcast on that stuff." And I was like, "But people would listen to it. Like, my biggest fear was making a podcast and people not listening to it. And then I kind of thought about the industry,
But then
and
why would you
most
even
personal
do that?
finance.
Because then no one would be there to make fun of you, right? If no one listens, right?
Exactly, right? Like even if people listen just to tune in and be like, this guy sucks. Hey man, you're listening. but and we live in a world where you can monetize attention. So I think building a brand is super crucial. But I thought about the personal finance world and the podcasts that I listen to, and most of them were pretty dry. Like if I wasn't in a chipper mood or I wasn't like in a let's go get it today mood, I would usually be bored and I'd want to turn back to listen to Drake and Future.
Yeah.
So if you can make a podcast that's engaging and a little different, right? I was like, I'll just take a different tone, and I think I talk about finance in a different tone than other people too. So find your whatever you're unique, and then find what you're interested in, and then you can kind of just run with that and see if people take to it.
Yeah.
But I eventually upped the quality a little bit. I bought the Blue Yeti mic during the pandemic. Everybody was podcasting, so it was like overpriced at the time, but I did what I had to do. I got
Yeah.
it. I got a nicer camera for work instead of recording off my computer laptop. And then I just started to get more consistent. And then I also started reaching out to different guests, people I know, because when you talk about money a lot in your personal life, people are going to be around you that have entrepreneurial mindsets, whether they are business owners or whether they just really love investing, whether they really love real estate, whether they really love buying cars, right? Like everybody has different kind of takes and things like that, and they're more likely to open up and be attracted to you. So I was able to find and tap into my network and then just start kind of talking to different people about what their niche is, how they got into it. And I try to give financial perspective, we'll say, instead of advice there. But most of the time I'm just talking about things that I do and work for me and articles I read and try to break them down into simpler terms and make it kind of interesting and tell a funny story with it. And then when I bring guests on, that's where the specialists come in my opinion, because I can't be a specialist on everything. And I'm not even smart enough to be a specialist on everything.
Yeah.
But I can network my ass off, and I am obnoxious as hell. And not everybody is obnoxious about getting their brand out there. So if I can make someone more well known or just help them get their word out there, most people usually are open to doing that too.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I guess what's your goal with the podcast? What do you hope is? Do you have a goal? Or are you just doing it for fun, just to keep yourself sharp? Because that's not a bad way to do it either. Because then you have to pay attention to things.
Yeah. When I started, I didn't necessarily have a goal. I actually thought you could get rich by making ads on podcast or by having ads on your podcast. And
Okay.
after a little bit of research, that's not really how people make money. And I think I make like $15 for every 1,000 views.
Okay.
That's not a bunch, right? Like that's not paying for my mortgage at all.
Yeah.
So from then I just started realizing that like everybody is doing things on social media, and social media can be I would say, like most things in life, an asset or a liability.
Mhm.
And so sometimes we can get really depressed just like comparing ourselves to other people. But if you are producing content and it's content that you enjoy making, then people will recognize that, hopefully, and then people will start to kind of follow you, and that's how you build a base up. I mean, you have a huge following base there. It's because every single day you're putting out content, helpful information, and it's good quality content too. So people will tune in. And then with that attention, you can kind of do whatever you want. You can write a book and pass the book on to them. You can make a website and just have them come to the website. You can sell clothing. So one of my next goals is to start doing some merchandise for my podcast. And I don't really care. I don't think that's going to be my retirement plan, but I just want to make some cool stuff. And if people think it's cool too, then you can buy it. That's your way of supporting the podcast, right? Like that's so I'm trying to create an ecosystem of Johnny.
Yeah.
That's like the big picture. That's what I call it. And I want it to entail like a website, a podcast, maybe some one-on-one consults as well. But I'm trying to be careful with that because you take on a lot of liability if you start talking to people about their current financial situation. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out the best way there, and then merchandise as well. So just doing more and more, and using the podcast to bring people aware of like me, John Odibo, Johnny Deeves, and what I'm about, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I think the merch is a good idea. That's something that I want to look into getting done. Just as it's especially if you can get it like printed on demand or shipped on demand. So you don't have to like spend a bunch of capital up front to,
Yeah.
buy 1,000 t-shirts or 1,000 hats or whatnot. So you have all that capital tied up in it. If you can just like design it and have it shipped and printed whenever someone wants it, which is what I did with my book, right? So I don't have to buy a ton of copies
Okay.
to get it out there. Amazon just ships it on demand.
Mm. Yeah.
But then you're creating another stream of income, right? Another
That's
potential
the
asset.
plan.
It may be small at first, but it could grow. Hey, even just a couple bucks here and there, starts paying for some of your little expenses. So you
Yeah.
have, so when you look at your budget, you realize all your like, daily expenses that you need to have are
Mhm.
taken care of by all the little side things you've been doing. So you have a lot more left over to invest or, treat yourself, right?
Yeah. I mean, you named it, you nailed it there. Income streams. That's what it's all about. And I think this the saying is that like the average millionaire has like 7 to 8 different income streams.
Hmm.
Well, I looked at my situation and I was like, I have one, and then you can also maybe consider dividends an income stream too. So I was like, okay, well that's two, but dividends when you're just getting started investing and stuff isn't very much, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well let's just do something else too, and that's kind of the goal here, just more income streams. But it's funny that you mentioned like, and I feel like I forgot this part of the question, but you said like what are the challenges and the hurdles and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, dude, it's stressful because I work my 9 to 5 job, and then I come and record the podcast, and then I'm also doing the house now. So I'm biting off a lot, and I find myself overwhelmed a lot more and more these days. But then I can sit back on like Friday night and be like, this is what I wanted. This
Yeah.
is the life, right? Like, it's like when entrepreneur, like I think there's a lot of sayings about like entrepreneurs don't work. It's taking a risk. So instead of working for someone else 40 hours a week, you're working for yourself like 24/7,
Yeah.
basically, right? Like you kind of always have to be on. You can set boundaries and such, but there's always something to be done. And
Yeah.
I like staying busy, but when it's your own personal thing too, it's kind of fun to think about like I'm stressed out, but it's like my podcast, it's my thing, and I really like that. And I think if more people took a risk of just starting something small, doesn't have to be a business. I didn't have any juicy business ideas.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't going to create the next Caterpillar or I wasn't going to create the next Microsoft, but I could just share what I already like talking about. So most people probably have a little bit of a hobby, fixing bikes, going hiking. I have a buddy who wants to start leading people out on hiking tours.
Yeah.
Again, huge liability risk. There, if someone gets eaten by
Sure.
a bear, like, will you sign your life over to me? So if anything happens to you out in the middle of nowhere, I'm off free. Like, but that's his passion, and he was a baller when it came to glamping. The only time I've ever gone and camped was twice with him, and we had electricity running
That
out in the campgrounds, right? So like, you find what
is
you're
really
passionate
glamping.
about,
That's glamping for sure.
right? Find what you're passionate about, and try to make a couple bucks off of it. There's probably someone who could use your expertise, and then they might pass it down too, or you pass it to more people. You grow.
Yeah. So I guess the theme of that is um taking on more responsibility, right? Because we kind of talked about it in the beginning. It is, budgeting, right? You got to take on responsibility to basically give yourself those action items and to look at that data of your own life. Continuous education. You got to take on the responsibility to find new sources, to question things, to continue to learn, and then goal setting. Um, and so how do you feel that taking on extra responsibility in your life by instead of just going to your 9 to 5 and then turning on, ish, probably half on for most people when they go to their 9 to 5s, right? They go in, they're kind of looking at fantasy football and whatever not, and then they work like 3 to 4 hours out of the day, and then they go home and they
Yeah.
don't think about work, and they do that just repetitively. Um, Whereas you, as an entrepreneur, like you go to work and then you come home, you do your podcast, you have your house and all these things. So you're adding responsibility to your life. So how do you feel like that's um, influenced your life or your perspective on things, or changed you for the better or worse?
Yeah. Well, I definitely don't think I'm the most responsible person now still. But I definitely wasn't as responsible as I am now 5 years ago, right?
Okay.
So you just kind of take on more and more and try to handle it. And like sometimes I think I can really suck with time management, and I'm like running late, or I'm like, oh, whoops, I forgot to send you the Zoom meeting for the podcast or something. I mess up, right? Like, but I'm trying. That's kind of my thing, and I'm just trying to be better at each of those consistently.
Mhm.
It's made me become more organized. And so I know what I just kind of shared there, it doesn't really sound like I'm super organized, but I'm way more organized than I used to be because I have to be. And one of my biggest weaknesses, and I think this would sound silly to people who are like, wow, he's trying to do a lot, but is discipline, right? Like working on the days you don't want to work. And that's also really hard. So sometimes just pushing through. But I definitely think it's changed me for the better. if anything, it just makes me a more interesting person, and I have more things to talk about when I go and talk to people, right? Like, not only do I just love personal finance, but I'm taking a risk and I'm really trying to make a bet on myself that other people want to hear me talk about personal finance. Not only do I read about and read these books about people building wealth, which is just kind of my interest, I'm gonna follow and try to do it. So I think it makes you kind of an action taker versus
Yeah.
just a talker, which I'm really good at doing. I'm really good at talking. When
Yeah.
you come and start taking the action, that's when it's like, God, it's a long to-do list. So I just think it's helped with my discipline. It's helped with my um, I guess my ability to just take action and just start doing stuff and have the trust in myself to figure it out as I move along. And I think most people could also really benefit from those types of things. Like, things don't have to be perfect to start with. Throw something at the wall, start walk like, and then just start figuring it out from there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like you said, what is it? It's built one brick at a time, right? Long-term wealth and success is built one brick at a time, and so you have to get started. Like you said, you just got started, and you didn't have a fancy mic, you didn't have a fancy camera, and you
Yeah,
just signed up and just went for it. And then now, you've been doing it 2 years, and
yeah, that's
you're
crazy to
getting
think
more
about.
consistent with it, right? You're growing your following with it, and things are starting to come together more and more. You're seeing the fruits of your labor at least pay off, and not only just the realm of your podcast, but probably also in your personal life as well. Like you said, more interesting. You have a hobby that you can do, right?
Yeah,
If you don't want to engage in the typical self destructive hobbies that a lot of people find themselves in, of just like drinking and partying and that kind of stuff, or binge watching Netflix.
yeah.
Have, at least an hour or so dedicated where you can do something else.
I agree there, right? Like, I mean, what you saw that post today, I'm like, what am I gonna do today? I'm gonna record 2 episodes, get my haircut, play some soccer, and then go have three too many cocktails tonight. Like, I still like having fun, and that's also what I try to preach a lot on the podcast.
Yeah.
Like, go on vacation, right? Go out with your friends. But if you are in debt, or if you have a goal that you're working towards, you need to have that conversation with yourself. You need to be a little tougher on yourself and ask yourself, am I really working towards that? Like, I had a coworker once. She asked me for some help. She's like, "Can you just like help me understand like why I'm not able to save money?" And I'm like, "Sure." She pulls up her Mint account. Mint is a personal finance tracking app, right? It tracks all of your finances that you link your credit cards to. And I was like, "What's that?" It's like $36 on a Thursday. And she's like, "Oh, that was happy hour. We were celebrating my friend." And I was like, "You're in debt. You're in credit card debt. What are you
Yeah.
celebrating?"
Yeah.
Right? And like, that's maybe a bit of a hardcore approach, but if you really wanted to get out of debt, you could have done it, right? That's the $36 that you just say no. Every now and then you just say no. And I
Yeah.
think as we get older, if we say no to more things, we're realistically saying no to others' goals or others' intentions, and yes to what we really want.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting better at filtering things out. It was like Warren Buffett was talking about this on some podcast the other day, or not the other day, but he was talking about this. Warren Buffett, and he basically was like, look, you'd think if you have $1 billion that you'd have unlimited options for things. And he's like, in certain realms, you kind of do. But he's like, when it comes to business and investments, he's like, my fund can't invest, $5 billion in just any company. We
Yeah.
are very limited. So we have to say no to a lot of options, a lot of situations.
Yeah.
Because we just can't do that and it doesn't work for us. And so you start looking at the world differently when you have an abundance of options, and when you start prioritizing your own goals and values, you realize that a lot of the situations that come up in your life aren't there for you, or someone else trying to impose their values on
Yes.
you, or someone else trying to get you to join their party or sell you on their vision, on their goal. And
Yeah.
come to that realization, you can start saying no to those, not because you don't like those people or you would never want to do that, but because you have your own priorities in line and you value
Yeah.
those and you know how to stick to them, right?
And that's the discipline too. That's where the discipline comes into play, right? Like, now it's like, okay, do I need to go out 3, 4 nights a week? I could probably do it. My body would hate me, but I could do it. I like having fun. And I did that in college, and I was somehow still able to wake up and go study. But now I look back at it now, and it's like, is that what I want to do? I'm spending a lot when I go out, so let's cut that in half.
Yep.
And then I feel like crap the next day, which means I lose at least half a day of productivity. So let's cut that back too, right? And it's figuring out what you want for your life. And that's why I said, like, your goals is like maybe the second biggest thing, because once you're very clear about them, you can become extremely intentional and start. I mean, some people go into a cave for like 2 years, and then they come out and they're a completely different person. And by a cave, I just mean people
Yeah.
are like, "Oh, we didn't see you." Yeah, bro, because I was working on my goals, man. Like, I don't know. I respect those people. I would say some people have more discipline than myself, and those are the ones that I really look up to. And I'm like, I wish sometimes I could be a little more intentional than I already am.
Yeah, and at least your eyes on it, right? A lot of people they don't have their eye on any of that, right?
Yeah.
I recently started doing 75 hard. Are you familiar?
Oh yeah, dude. Oh
Yeah,
my god.
yeah. I recently started. It's something I've wanted to do for a while, and just like I kept putting it off, right? I kept putting it
Yeah.
off, and so it kind of makes you commit to being disciplined on certain things, right? And I just find it interesting, like if you bring up to someone the the idea of doing 75 hard, even if like you're saying I do it, a lot of people immediately start making excuses, and they have all these reasons why they can't do it. Oh, I can never do that. Oh, I could never give up insert this unhealthy thing. I can never give up alcohol. I can never give up beer. I can never give up these sweets, right?
Yeah.
And so they have all these things, and I'm like, when I hear this, I'm like, are you really trying to draw lines in the sand that can hinder your progress for things that you've said you wanted around unhealthy habits, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like you say you want this, right? This goal or outcome, but then you are so willing to prioritize unhealthy things in your life that aren't going to help you get there. So it's like, where's the
Yeah.
disconnect? You're like, you're either not being honest with yourself and saying you want the outcome,
Yeah.
or you are just like being weak and just giving in to the indulgences.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, dude, that's where like the tough love sometimes comes into play. But 75 hard, man, that sounds really hard. And so I like that you just said there, it's like instead of saying I can't do that, just more be honest with yourself of like what is really prohibiting me, right? It's like, oh, maybe I have a drinking problem and I couldn't give up drinking or something. I
Yeah.
actually think I could give up drinking, not easily, but like if I go work, gym, eat,
Mhm.
it's 8 o'clock. I don't really need a drink then. I'll have a protein shake, you know?
Yeah.
So I think you got to replace busy time or busy empty time sometimes that we fill with bad habits with a better habit. I think and then that's why I think 75 hard because what's that? Two workouts a day?
Yeah, yeah. So it's really like it's not hard. It's just like consistency and prioritization. It's like,
Yeah.
because if you mess up, if you don't get something done, you got to restart. And so basically the challenge is,
Oh, I didn't know you had to restart.
yeah, yeah. So you don't get a cheat day, right? You can't be like on day, 25 and then you
Oh
have
man.
have a cheat meal.
Yeah.
And so but I think what people do is they like have all these fears when they hear about potential restrictions in their life that make them deviate from the normal habits. They start projecting out into the future, like these ideas. Oh, I'm gonna really want a cake, within 30 days. Like I'm gonna really want something, and so that fear of loss of that thing, even though they might not even have a piece of cake in the next month, they're like, wait, I can't eat cake, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, and they get
Yeah.
so like, and they let that hold them up. And it's like, wait, how many pieces of cake do you eat a month in general? Like, do you really like, if you're eating a ton of
Yeah.
cake, and you're trying to lose weight, you probably, need to reprioritize things, or at least just admit that you're not going to lose the weight because you like the cake, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So what is 75 hard? It's two workouts, no sugar, no alcohol.
so it's two workouts, no alcohol, no drugs, right? I think it specifically says no alcohol, but I just kind of tossed in like no drugs. Weed's legal in Colorado, so like you can't be doing weed, right?
Yeah.
But so then that, and then you have to read 10 pages of a nonfiction book a day. You have to drink a gallon of water, and take a progress picture. I think that's basically it. And then follow a diet. So you can do sugar, you can eat sugar. It's just you
Oh,
gotta
okay.
follow a diet. So it doesn't have to be any sort of specific diet. Just like I think it's more on you have to consciously choose your food.
Yeah. Are
And
you doing any type of diet or are you just trying to eat relatively healthy? Like how are
uh,
you doing?
I'm doing like trying to eat relatively healthy with like carnivore animal based. So no vegetables,
Like
no
bison and
carbs.
stuff? Like wild game?
What's up?
What is a carnivore animal day?
Oh, animal based, carnivore animal
Oh,
based.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So just like yeah, no processed foods, right? So
Okay.
it's basically meat, ideally grass fed, red meat sources, or grass fed meat that is has less toxins in it.
Mhm.
So you typically want to avoid chicken, pork because they tend to have more
Oh,
toxins in them, but how they're raised and how they're farmed.
okay.
And then you don't want to have a lot of preservatives or things like that in the food. And then organic fruits are a big thing there, so you get some carbs there. Raw dairy if you can handle it.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the base of it. So
Yeah.
I basically
And
do.
what day are you on?
I'm on like 30. I started August 1st, so like 32, 33. Yeah.
Yeah, you just did a month. That's awesome, dude.
Yeah. But it's definitely like it definitely teaches that you can fit things in your day, like when you readjust your priorities, just like you talked about,
Yeah,
like your budget. It's like, people think they can't cut out things, or they think that it's going to hinder their life or going to make their life worse, right? But if they pick the right things to cut out or the right things to focus on and prioritize, I think things will get better, right? Because also
those
it
are
gives you
all
less,
really good habits to have. Yeah, absolutely.
and it gives you less decision fatigue. Like, I know, like, maybe you think differently, but I don't think the avocado toast and the Starbucks are what's really causing millennials not to be able to save their money.
Yeah,
Um, right?
I agree. Those are $5 expenses on the weekly basis. Like, think bigger.
Yeah. But if you can draw a line in the sand and say, hey, no, I'm just not going to do that, right? Then you don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about it because the answer is no, right?
Yeah,
But I think it's when a problem when things are gray areas, you
that
know,
makes
where we're like, it could be yes sometimes, most times it's no, maybe, depending on how you feel, right? Those are the things that really can cause conflict. But I think if you can draw a line in the sand, like what you talked about, is like, I'm going to do a budget, right? I'm going to
yeah,
hit my budget, right? And I'm going
yeah,
to check my budget before I do any sort of unnecessary expenses.
yeah. And then at
And
the end of the month, you're like, I can't afford this. Sorry, that's a no.
yeah, it makes it really clear, right?
Yeah,
You're like, it's not you making the decision, it's your budget making the decision. You've outsourced it to a system that you put in place.
yeah.
Um,
I also like the idea of no spend days sometimes, where like one day a week you'll pick like a Tuesday or something where you don't spend any money that day. And it's
yeah,
like, oh, but I like to go, I want to go out to lunch with my coworkers. It's a no spend day. What are we talking about? Oh, I want a beer. I want to go to the bar. No spend day. What are we talking about? No gas today either.
yeah, and I think that's a great idea. So I might have to start implementing that. It's just like, yeah, it's a no spend day, and so it's just a no. So
Yeah.
you have to question it.
And you'd be surprised because every single day, if we're buying, like, you might not buy Starbucks often, but if you buy it every single day, then one no spend day, that's $5 a day, that's $20 a month. That's just an example on the Starbucks feature right there, but that's $20 a month that you just got from cutting out your daily coffee that day. Now, if you're doing it for lunch every single day too, then that pretty much doubles right there, at least. So, yeah, I think that's an easy one for people to kind of implement too.
Yeah. Now, what would you think about this? Is something that I did. Was I was playing Pokemon Go a lot, and especially during the pandemic, and I was like, man, initially I wasn't buying anything in the game, and then I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna buy some stuff in the game because there's nothing else to do. And then I looked at like my Apple bill, and I was like, damn, did I really spend $100 on Pokemon this month? Right? It was fun, but
Yeah.
but so I kind of made it a thing. So if I ever going forward, I was like, I can't be spending $100 on Pokemon, right? But if I can afford $100 on Pokemon, right, what else can I fit in there that'd be productive rather than counterproductive, right? Something that could turn into an asset versus a liability, right? Or just
Yeah.
a one-off expenditure. So I basically said, like, whenever I wanted to buy something in Pokemon, if I did, I had to first off cut my budget in half. But then whenever I bought something, I'd have to spend an equal amount of money investing.
Yes. I absolutely love that. I love when people like, if you do have a guilty pleasure, right? If I, for example, so tomorrow I'm probably gonna go to Blackhawk and I'm probably gonna gamble.
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna gamble like $200 or so. But when I just got that, did you get a Tabor check?
No, not yet, not yet.
Okay. When I got the Tabor check, I did a podcast episode on that, but basically that was like a $750 tax reimbursement for the residents of Colorado. $750. I took 500 of it and put it in the stock market right away. It's the additional 250 that I want to go and use
Yeah,
to go and gamble. And other times, like if it's like you go to Vegas and again, I'm gonna go gamble. It's like if I go gamble, anything I do there has to also be put in the stock market. And then guess what? I'm gonna think twice about how much I gamble. And then also I know I'm kind of coming out even if not better, because that's money that I went and invested. And
yeah,
I might win money from gambling.
yeah. It's like you have two piggy banks, one for present John and one for future John. It's like,
Yeah.
whenever you spend, you got to put one for present John and one for future John. You got to pay
Yeah.
future John.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with having fun, but just be mindful and see where that fits into the budget. And again, is it working towards your long-term goals? Like you're not going to gamble every single weekend, right? Like it's a special treat kind of thing.
Yeah,
So if you treat yourself, just be mindful and then try to also pay yourself back, or even paying yourself first knows exactly how much money you have left at the end of the month to treat yourself, which I'm like a big fan of. So that's another way to go about it too.
yeah. That's awesome. So we're getting close to the end, but I want to bring up one last thing, topic that we didn't really dive into is my topic, but crypto, Bitcoin.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on it now? I mean, the market's down, right? We're in this kind of bear market. It's seen as typically a risk on asset, and currently we're in times where risk on assets aren't favorable with the tightening liquidity in the markets with the raising interest rates. So what are your thoughts on it long term? Like, do you, as a finance guy, do you distinguish between Bitcoin and crypto? Do you see it something staying around long term? Like, what do you think its hurdles are?
that's an interesting. I like that last part there where you mentioned the difference between crypto and Bitcoin. But I'll get to that in a second. So I do own cryptocurrency. I don't think it's something that I am super knowledgeable on. I kind of just know maybe like what I would argue is like the bare bones.
Mhm.
And I do think it's beneficial to diversify into different assets. I again, you got to have the building blocks, the foundation up, the emergency fund, all that, and then why not take some risks, right? Like if Bitcoin doubles or triples over time, you want to miss out on that, right? Like I am upset still that I did not purchase in, I think it was 2017
Yep.
when it was at like 20,000 and then it dropped down to like two.
Yep.
And I remember in the office very vividly, like my coworkers and I, we were all following it. And I mean, I didn't really know enough about it at the time, but I kind of wish I'd gotten into it even at 20, right? Like who cares over time, we're kind of balancing out. So last year, and I guess the year before too, so 2020, 2021, I got very bullish, started doing a lot more research and starting investing a lot more. At first, only Bitcoin, and then I did some Ethereum, and then there's like a couple other altcoins like Filecoin and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Because I follow some newsletters that are basically talking about these other ones, and I'm like, you know what, putting a couple $100 into that could pay off huge in a lifetime.
Mhm.
But also, like the stock market was kind of fluctuating towards the end of 2021. It had a huge boom after March, and then it was like pausing. And
Yeah.
so I just think it's good to diversify in general.
Yeah.
And I think at a younger age, it makes a lot of sense to take a big risk on that. But I am a long-term investor. I'm not trying to buy Bitcoin and then sell it a month later and for a quick profit. If it goes down, I'll either buy more or just hold. And that's kind of the position we're in right now. I'm in more of like a holding position.
Yeah. Okay. So do you think it has a future?
Absolutely. And I think the futures are interesting, right? Like I think there's more utility than we're even using right now. But more and more companies, banks, all that are starting to offer ways to purchase through Bitcoin, and the utility there is just growing. What Ethereum just went through like a huge upgrade, right?
Some
Is
say
that
some say it's an upgrade.
some say it's an upgrade? Is it ETH2? Is that what's out now?
Not yet. So it's coming out in middle of allegedly, I think like September 15th. So in about 2 weeks. So
Okay.
definitely pay attention to that. But it's they're changing the consensus mechanism from proof of work to proof of stake. Which there's a whole kind of back and forth within the crypto Bitcoin crypto world about, is that good? Is it bad? Is it the future? Is it, what's it going to be?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it's very polarizing. It's gonna be interesting. It's
Okay.
gonna be interesting to see play out, right? Because you're witnessing like, especially in the crypto space, you're witnessing a network. I don't know, it's like $100-something billion network right now. Completely change its fundamentals, right? Completely change how it's operating. Um, and they got to pull it off, right? They've been working on this for like 6 years, so it's been a long time. It's been a long time coming, and
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
I think it's an exciting time. I think it's something to watch. As a guy who talks about money, I kind of have to watch it, but I have been watching at a high level. And then even what you're just saying there, you said proof of stake versus proof of work.
Yep.
I don't know what those differences mean. Maybe
Yeah.
that's a post right there for you.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
but to me, like I'm not an expert, but I am bullish long term. And I think if anybody is thinking about getting into the market, like starting with like a Bitcoin or something, right, is the equivalent of starting with like Amazon.
Hmm.
Uh, well, I would argue that it's like the one of the biggest
It's a
names
blue
in the
chip.
space,
It's
and that's blue
yeah,
chip.
it's blue chip. Yeah,
Exactly,
it's an easy go to, right? Like,
exactly. And so that's kind of where I started dipping my toe in. And I did what I recommend people do with the stock market. I put like $100 in and I just watched it for a couple weeks and I saw how it moved and I was like, holy shit, right? Like it's very up and down. It's a very volatile market. It's not the stock market. So then I put a little bit more in and then I started doing some other or following some other coins to kind of also try to get some of that diversification within cryptocurrency as an asset itself.
hmm well, cool. That's good to hear finance guy is paying attention to it. I mean, but it's also cool, like just for me being, because I'm immersed in that space and that side of things, because I have to be, right? And so it's what I like. But
Yeah.
um, that someone like yourself who is up to date on how to be financially literate, how to get how to plan for the long term, all of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
The kind of traditional finance world, um, that you still don't know what's fully going on in the crypto world, right? It hasn't fully seeped in, and so for
Yeah.
me, like I find that to be I find that to be bullish, right? Because you know
Yeah.
about it, you're bullish on it, you see a future in it, you see long term potential, you've heard about it, right?
Mhm.
But you're not like fully aware about everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Knowledge and information has a whole extra other group of people, subset of people that it needs to travel to. So that makes me excited,
There's
right?
a lot for me to learn. And then there's also people who are like, I don't understand it at all, so I don't invest in it. Those people, I think, yeah, as it becomes more common, we'll start to hear and see and learn a little bit more. And then when that happens, I think that they're going to also start to dip their toes in the water, and then that's good for the whole market, right? Yeah. So I definitely think that, like, for it to be the end of the crypto market, it would have to mean that everybody who knows about crypto and everybody who is bullish on it is like already invested.
Yeah,
And that's just such a small level minded layer of thinking right there. Like there are so many people out there who do not know anything about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and that's all open market, right? So that's kind of why I would also think it's bullish too. I would agree with you there.
yeah. I mean, the figures I hear a lot are we're about 200 to 300 million people worldwide right now, and it's growing twice as fast as the internet was in the late 90s with a similar number of users. So
Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah. So who knows what that'll look like in 3 to 5 years?
Right.
Or I think
Those who bet
we're on.
early,
What's up?
those who made the bet early, hopefully they're set up super nicely, like now or even before 2020 or so. Like, who knows? You're gonna be rewarded for that risk that you took, I believe. But it is a risk too, and that's also the other thing.
Yeah. You got to be strategic about it. Make sure it's
That's
done
that's
lined
what I,
up.
that's what I tell people. Yeah, I'm like it's diversification, right? Like, don't put money into the stock market if you think you're gonna if you need it. I would say the same thing about crypto.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good to end on. John, where can people find you if they want to get more information on your podcast, what you're up to?
Yeah, so for all personal John Odibo details, my Instagram is John Odibo, JOHNODIBO. But most importantly, you can follow the Talk Cash or Don't Speak podcast at Talk Cash Pod on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And then I drop a new episode every Tuesday, live on every streaming service. I call it Talk Cash Tuesday, Spotify, Apple, whatever, wherever you guys want to watch or listen to or stream your podcasts, I'll be there. The only place I'm not right now is YouTube, and we're working on that. That's another project that's editing video, and that's a whole nother problem to deal with.
Maybe you can just repost this one and put it on your channel, right? I can see
That's the first. It'll be the first one. There we go. I love it.
I can see the raw file or like my edit, and you can just upload it to your channel.
That's. I mean, I should probably just start doing that, and then like have because sometimes there are like coughs and stuff you want to edit out, but like for a long format podcast or for like an hour long episode, who really cares if someone like coughs? You're watching them, right? Like you're feeling connected with them by watching them. So I think it's a totally different like a viewer than who listens to podcasts sometimes and they want perfection and crisp sound.
Oh yeah, I mean, some people cough multiple times when they're addressing the entire nation, on live TV.
My man.
So clearly, if it's okay for them, so it could be okay for you.
That's awesome. No, Dylan, I really appreciate you having me on, man. And I hope the listeners are able to get some good thoughts and feedback from this episode. And I hope you guys check out the Talk Cash or Don't Speak podcast.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone go check out John's podcast. Thanks, John.